The sky burned orange and red as the ship fell through the clouds of Velith 9, spinning out of control and trailing smoke like a dying comet across the horizon. Commander Marcus Cole gripped the controls with white knuckles, fighting against the violent shaking that threatened to tear his vessel apart. And he knew in his heart that this was going to hurt. The Dominion cruiser had come out of nowhere, its weapons tearing through his small rescue shuttle before he could even send a distress signal. And now he was nothing more than a falling rock on a planet that was already dying. He hit the ground hard, the impact throwing him forward against his restraints with enough force to crack his ribs and fill his mouth with the taste of blood. For a long moment, he lay there in the wreckage, listening to the hiss of escaping air and the distant thunder of explosions somewhere beyond the mountains. And he wondered if this was where his story would end. Marcus Cole was 34 years old, a veteran of 3 conflicts, and a member of the Terran Relief Corps, the humans who went into war zones not to fight but to save lives. And he had seen enough death to last 1,000 lifetimes, but he had never seen anything like Velith 9. The Dominion of Keth had ruled this sector for centuries, crushing any species that dared to resist their iron grip. And now they had turned their attention to the Sithari, a peaceful people whose only crime was living on a planet rich with neural crystals. Marcus had heard the reports, had seen the images of burning cities and mass graves, and he had volunteered for this mission, knowing it might be his last now, trapped in a broken ship on a dying world. He realized that his rescue mission had become something else entirely. He was the one who needed rescuing. The hatch above him groaned and then fell away, and pale light poured into the cockpit, along with the smell of smoke and something sweeter, like flowers blooming in a garden after rain. A face appeared above him, and Marcus found himself staring at something he had never seen before. She was Sithari, her skin a soft silver blue that seemed to glow with its own inner light, and her eyes were like shattered crystals reflecting 1,000 colors at once. 3 delicate fingers reached down toward him, and her voice was like music when she spoke, soft and careful and filled with fear. "You are injured," she said. And it was not a question, I noticed, Marcus managed to say through the pain in his chest. She tilted her head, studying him with those impossible eyes, and he saw something flicker across her face, curiosity mixed with caution, like a deer approaching a wounded wolf. "You are human," she whispered, and the way she said it made it sound like both a wonder and a warning. "Last time I checked," he replied. And then the darkness took him when Marcus woke. He was lying on something soft in a cave lit by glowing crystals that pulsed with gentle blue light. And the Sithari woman was kneeling beside him with her hands pressed against his chest. Warmth spread through his body, sinking into his bones and knitting together the broken pieces inside him. And he realized with amazement that she was healing him. How? He asked. "It is what we do," she answered without opening her eyes. "We are healers, not warriors, and we give life instead of taking it." Marcus watched her work, watched the light flow from her hands into his body, and he felt something stir inside him that he had not felt in years. "Hope, what is your name?" he asked. "Lyris," she said, and her eyes opened to meet his. "And you should not be here. Human, the Dominion will find you, and they will kill you. And they will kill anyone who helped you." "Then why did you help me?" Lyris was silent for a long moment, her glow dimming in what Marcus would later learn was the Sithari way of showing sadness. "Because you fell from the sky," she finally said, "and I could not watch another being die without trying to save them. It is not in my nature, even if it means my death." Over the following days, Marcus learned the truth about Velith 9 and the nightmare that had consumed it. The Dominion had arrived 3 months ago with a fleet of warships and an army of soldiers, and they had begun the systematic extermination of the Sithari people. 10 million had lived on this world before the invasion. Now fewer than 10,000 remained, hiding in caves and valleys and anywhere else they could escape the hunters. The Scythery had no weapons, no military, no history of violence at all. They were empaths and healers, artists and singers, and they had spent 10,000 years building a civilization based on peace and compassion. And now they were being slaughtered like animals. Why don't you fight back? Marcus demanded one evening as he sat with Lyris and a group of Scythery, elders in a cavern deep beneath the crystal valleys. The eldest among them, a male whose glow had faded to almost nothing, looked at Marcus with ancient eyes full of resignation. Fight with what? He asked. We have no weapons, no training, no instinct for violence. The very thought of harming another being causes us physical pain. And we would rather die than become what the Dominion is. So you just accept extinction? It is the way of things, Lyris said softly, her hand finding his arm. The strong devour the weak. The violent consume the peaceful. This is the truth of the universe. And we have made our peace with it. Marcus stared at her, at all of them. These gentle beings who had saved his life and asked nothing in return. And he felt something ignite in his chest. A fire that burned away his despair and replaced it with something far more dangerous: determination. No, he said. And his voice was quiet but filled with iron. That is not the way of anything. That is just a lie the strong tell themselves to justify their cruelty. And I refuse to accept it. The Scythery looked at him with confusion, and Lyris's grip tightened on his arm. What can one human do against an empire? She asked. Marcus smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the dying elders sit up straighter. Watch me, he said. I am going to teach you something your people have never known. I am going to teach you how to resist. And in that moment, in a cave on a dying world, surrounded by a people who had given up hope, Commander Marcus Cole began a revolution that would shake the stars themselves. The weeks that followed changed everything for the Scythery people, and they would speak of this time for generations to come, as the awakening Marcus did not try to turn them into soldiers, understood that violence was not in their nature, and he respected that more than they could ever know. Instead, he taught them something different, something that required no weapons and no bloodshed, but was just as powerful. In its own way, he taught them how to refuse. Resistance is not always about fighting, he told them one morning as hundreds of Scythery gathered in the great cavern to listen, their soft glows creating a sea of blue light around him. Sometimes it is about surviving when your enemy wants you dead. Sometimes it is about saying no when the whole universe tells you to give up. He showed them how to build hidden passages that the Dominion scanners could not detect, and how to create false trails that would lead enemy patrols into dead ends. He taught them how to move silently through the crystal forests, how to communicate with hand signals across vast distances, and how to disappear like ghosts when danger approached. He showed them how to sabotage supply lines without ever touching a weapon, how to contaminate fuel reserves with substances found in the caves, and how to disable vehicles with nothing more than patience and cleverness. The Scythery learned quickly, their natural empathy allowing them to sense approaching enemies before they came into view, and their intimate knowledge of the land giving them advantages that no outsider could match. Lyris became Marcus's shadow during these weeks, following him everywhere and translating his words for those who could not understand the human language. But she was more than just a translator. She was his conscience, his guide, and the voice that kept him grounded when his plans grew too harsh. You cannot ask them to do this, she said one night when Marcus proposed a plan to collapse a tunnel on a Dominion patrol. They would feel every death as if it were their own. The pain would destroy them. Marcus looked at her in the dim light, and he saw the truth in her words. Then we find another way, he said. And they did. This was how their bond deepened. Through long nights of planning and arguing and finding middle ground between human ruthlessness and Scythery compassion, Lyris taught Marcus the concept of Vulthon, a word that had no translation in any human language, but meant something like a connection between souls that transcended physical form. "I feel what you feel," she told him one evening as they sat on a ledge overlooking the Crystal Valley. "Your grief and your anger and your desperate hope, they echo in my chest like music, and I cannot separate them from my own emotions anymore." Marcus looked at her. This alien woman who was so different from him in every way, yet somehow understood him better than anyone ever had. "Is that normal for your people?" he asked. "No," she admitted. And her glow brightened with what he had learned was embarrassment. "It happens rarely, and only between souls that are meant to find each other. My people would say that we are bound now. You and I, and that bond will last until death and perhaps beyond." Marcus did not know what to say to that. So he simply took her hand in his, and they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. But peace never lasts on a world at war. Dominion had noticed the change in their prey, and Admiral Vorith Kane descended from orbit to deal with the problem personally. Kane was a legend among the Dominion forces, a tactical genius who had crushed a dozen rebellions and conquered twice as many worlds. He was massive even by Dominion standards, his gray skin marked with ritual scars that told the story of every enemy he had slain, and his 4 eyes burned with cold intelligence as he studied the reports from Velith 9. "A human," he said, and the word came out like a curse. "I should have known." He bore scars from his last encounter with humanity, long pale lines across his face and chest from a battle that had nearly killed him. And he had learned to respect the persistence of these strange creatures from Earth. "Find him," he ordered his troops, "and bring him to me alive. I want to watch the hope drain from his eyes before I execute him." The hunt intensified, with Dominion patrols sweeping across the planet in ever-tightening circles. And the Sithari found themselves running out of places to hide. Then Kane delivered his message, broadcast across every frequency so that every survivor on the planet could hear it. "Attention, creatures of Velith 9. His voice boomed through the speakers Marcus had rigged to monitor Dominion communications. "I know a human walks among you. I know he has filled your heads with foolish dreams of resistance, and I am here to end those dreams forever." The Sithari gathered around Marcus, their glows flickering with fear as Kane continued. "Surrender the Terran to me within 3 days, and I will grant you quick deaths instead of slow ones. Refuse, and I will deploy the silence protocol, and your world will burn until not even ash remains." Silence fell over the cavern as the transmission ended, and every Sithari looked at Marcus with the same unspoken question in their eyes. Marcus stood slowly, his jaw tight with determination that he did not entirely feel. "I will go," he said. "I will surrender myself, and maybe—" "No." Lyris's voice cut through the cavern like a blade, and she stepped forward to face him with fire in her crystalline eyes. "If you go, you teach us that hope can be surrendered," she said, and her glow burned brighter than he had ever seen it. "You teach us that when things become difficult, we should give up and accept our fate. Is that the lesson you want to leave behind?" Marcus stared at her, speechless. "You told us to resist," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "You told us that refusing to die was a victory in itself. Were those just words, or did you mean them?" The other Sithari began to glow brighter as well, their lights joining together until the cavern blazed like a small sun. "We will not surrender you," the eldest said, stepping forward with strength Marcus had not seen in him before. "We have learned too much to return to what we were. We would rather die fighting than live as victims." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, and he blinked them away as he looked at these gentle beings who had chosen to stand with him. "Then we need a new plan," he said 3 days later. Admiral Kane made good on his threat. A fleet of atmospheric incinerators descended into orbit. their weapons charging with enough power to turn the entire surface of Velith 9 into a sea of fire. The silence protocol had begun, and unless something changed, every living thing on the planet would be dead within 72 hours. But Marcus Cole had a plan, a desperate, impossible, suicidal plan that required him to fly directly into hell itself and pray that somehow he made it through to the other side. And as he prepared for what might be his final mission, he knew that everything he had taught the Sithari would be tested in the flames to come. The night before Marcus left was the longest of his life, filled with preparations and farewells and silence that hung over the caves like a funeral shroud. His plan was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. He would pilot a salvage shuttle through the debris field that surrounded the planet, slip past the Dominion fleet while they prepared for the planetary burn, and somehow board the command carrier known as the Throne of Keth. Once inside, he would make his way to the main reactor and trigger an overload that would destroy the ship and kill Admiral Kane along with it. Without their flagship and their commander, the Dominion fleet would fall into chaos, and the silence protocol would fail before it could be completed. The Sithari engineers had spent days repairing the shuttle that Marcus had crashed in, and they had done incredible work with limited resources. But everyone knew the truth, that no one wanted to speak aloud. This was a one-way trip. The shuttle was barely functional, held together with salvaged parts and desperate hope, and the journey through the debris field would push it beyond its limits. So even if Marcus somehow made it to the carrier, even if he somehow got inside and reached the reactor, the explosion would vaporize everything within 100 kilometers. There was no coming back from this mission. Marcus spent the evening checking his equipment and going over the plan one final time, and he tried not to think about everything he was leaving behind. He had sent a message to Earth 3 days ago, a final report that detailed everything he had learned about the Dominion and everything this theory had taught him about courage. He did not know if the message would ever reach home, but he hoped that someone would remember what happened here. He hoped that his death would mean something. Sithari elders came to him one by one as the hours passed, each offering their blessing in the traditional way, a touch of their glowing hands to his forehead that left warmth spreading through his mind. "You have given us something precious," the eldest told him, his faded light brightening for just a moment. "You have given us the courage to hope again, and we will never forget what you have done for us." "Just survive," Marcus replied, his voice rough with emotion he could not quite control. "That is all I ask. Survive and remember and teach your children that giving up is never the only option." The elder nodded and withdrew, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the distant sound of Sithari singing somewhere deeper in the caves. Their songs were beautiful, haunting melodies that seemed to contain entire histories within their notes. And tonight they sang for him. They sang of a stranger who fell from the stars, of a warrior who taught peace through resistance, and of a sacrifice that would echo through eternity. Marcus listened until he could not bear it anymore. And then he walked to the cave entrance to stand beneath the open sky. The stars were visible tonight, burning bright and cold between the clouds of smoke that still rose from distant fires. And Marcus wondered which of those tiny lights was Earth. He wondered if he would ever see home again. He already knew the answer. Footsteps approached behind him, soft and careful on the stone, and he did not need to turn around to know who it was. "You should be resting," Lyra said as she came to stand beside him, her glow muted to almost nothing in the darkness. "Could not sleep," he admitted. "Neither could I." They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead and feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing down upon them. "I have been trying to think of what to say to you," Lyris finally spoke, and her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I have been searching for the right words to express what you mean to me, and I cannot find them. There are no words in my language or yours that can capture it. Marcus turned to look at her, and he saw tears flowing down her silver blue cheeks, glowing faintly in the starlight like liquid diamonds. Then do not say anything, he suggested. Sometimes words are not enough, but I must, she insisted. And her hand found his in the darkness, her 3 fingers intertwining with his 5. I must tell you that meeting you changed everything I believed about the universe. I thought we were alone in our suffering, that no one cared whether we lived or died, and then you fell from the sky and proved me wrong. She stepped closer, and Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could see his own reflection in her fractured crystal eyes. You taught us that hope is not weakness, she continued. You showed us that standing up for what you believe in is worth any price. And you gave us a reason to keep fighting even when all seems lost. I just did what anyone would do, Marcus said. But Lyris shook her head. No, you did what only a human would do. And that is why my people will remember you forever. And that is why She stopped, her glow flickering with emotions too complex to name. That is why I love you, she finished. And the words hung in the air between them like something sacred. Not in the way humans love, perhaps, but in the way of my people completely and forever. Bound through Velthon until the stars themselves grow cold. Marcus felt his heart break and mend and break again, all in the space of a single breath he had known. On some level, that their bond had grown into something more than friendship. But hearing her say it aloud made it real in a way he had not been prepared for. Lyris, he started. But she pressed a finger to his lips. Do not say anything you do not mean, she said. I know you must go, and I know what waits for you up there. I felt your certainty through our bond, and I have made my peace with it. She placed her hand against his chest, palm flat over his heart, and he covered it with his own. But I need to ask you something, she whispered, and her voice trembled with desperate hope. I need to hear your answer, even if it is a lie. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw everything she could not say, the fear and the love and the terrible weight of knowing that Dawn would take him away forever. Will you come back for me, human? She whispered. The question broke something inside Marcus. Some wall he had built around his heart to protect himself from the pain of caring. He wanted to lie to her, wanted to promise that everything would be fine and that he would return safely when the battle was over. But he could not lie to her. Not with their souls bound together. Not when she would feel the truth of his words, no matter what he said. I do not know, he admitted, and his voice cracked with honesty he could not hide. The odds are against me, and the mission is almost certainly suicide. And I would be lying if I said I expected to survive. Lyris's glow dimmed until she was almost invisible in the darkness, and he felt her despair echo through their bond like a physical blow. But then he lifted her chin with gentle fingers and forced her to meet his eyes. But I swear to you, he said, and there was steel in his voice that would not bend. I swear on everything I am and everything I have ever believed, I will try. He pulled her close and held her against his chest, her smaller form fitting perfectly against him as if they had been made to stand together. I will fight through whatever they throw at me, he continued, speaking the words into her hair. I will claw my way through hell itself if I have to, and I will do everything in my power to come back to you, not because I think I will succeed, but because you asked me to try, and I could never deny you anything. They stood together until dawn painted the sky in shades of fire, and then Marcus gently released her and walked toward the shuttle that would carry him to his destiny. He did not look back. Could not Lyris watched him go, her hand pressed against her chest where his heartbeat still echoed in her soul. And she watched until his shuttle became a point of light in the burning sky, and then she whispered a prayer to stars that she hoped were listening. A prayer for the human who had taught her people to hope, and who now carried all their hopes with him into the darkness. The flight through the debris field was a nightmare that seemed to last forever. Marcus gripped the controls of his battered shuttle as wreckage tumbled past on all sides. Fragments of destroyed ships and burned satellites spinning through the void like the remnants of 100 forgotten battles. His plan relied on a single observation he had made while studying the Dominion fleet. They never scanned for small craft approaching from within the debris field because they never expected their prey to fly toward the danger. Arrogance had always been the weakness of conquerors, and Marcus intended to exploit it. The shuttle shook violently as he navigated through the chaos, warning lights flashing across every display as the damaged engines struggled to maintain power. A piece of debris clipped his wing and sent him spinning. And for one terrible moment, he thought it was over, but he wrestled the controls back and steadied his course. His jaw clenched tight against the pain in his still healing ribs. The throne of Kath loomed ahead, massive and terrible, its dark hull bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half. Admiral Vorith Kane's flagship was the largest vessel Marcus had ever seen. A mountain of metal and malice did seem to swallow the stars themselves. He guided his shuttle toward the lower hangar bays, using the debris as cover until the last possible momenta. Dominion patrol ships swept past, its sensors passing over his tiny craft without registering anything but another piece of wreckage. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. So far so good. Then everything went wrong. A chunk of debris struck his engine at the worst possible moment, and plasma fire erupted from the shuttle's rear compartment. Alarm screamed as the vessel began to plummet toward the carrier. No longer flying but falling, Marcus fought the controls with everything he had, angling the dying shuttle toward the hangar bay he had targeted. He hit the deck at full speed, the impact throwing him forward against his restraints, hard enough to make his vision go white. The shuttle skidded across the hangar floor in a shower of sparks and flame, finally crashing to a stop against a stack of supply crates. For a long moment, Marcus could not move. Pain radiated through his entire body, and he was fairly certain that at least 2 of his ribs had broken again. But he was alive, and he was inside the enemy ship. He dragged himself out of the wreckage before the Dominion soldiers could arrive, taking only his scavenged pistol and a combat knife he had carried since his first mission. Blood dripped from a gash on his forehead, and every breath felt like fire in his chest. It did not matter. He had a promise to keep. Next 6 hours became legend among both humans and Sithari. A story that would be told and retold until it grew into myth. Marcus Cole, wounded and alone, fought his way through the most heavily defended warship in the Dominion fleet. He moved through maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts, using the ship's own complexity against the soldiers who hunted him. He set traps in narrow corridors and ambushed patrols from the shadows, striking fast and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The Dominion soldiers had never faced anything like him. They were bigger than he was, stronger and faster, and equipped with superior weapons. But Marcus had something they did not understand: the stubborn refusal to die that humans had carried in their blood. Since the dawn of their species, he was a persistence predator, a hunter from a world where survival meant never giving up. And he brought that ancient instinct with him into the heart of the enemy ship. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he found a way out. Every time they closed the trap, he was already gone. He took injuries that would have killed a lesser being: a plasma burn across his left arm, a deep cut in his thigh, a concussion that made the world spin around him, and still he kept moving. Admiral Vorith Kane tracked his progress through the ship with growing horror, watching on security monitors as his soldiers fell one by one to this impossible creature. "What is he?" one of his officers whispered as Marcus disabled another patrol with nothing but his knife and his bare hands. "Human," Kane answered. And for the first time in his long career of conquest, his voice held fear. He had faced humans before, had underestimated them and paid the price with the scars on his face. He knew what they were capable of when pushed beyond the breaking point. "Seal the reactor core," he ordered. "Put every soldier we have between him and—" "Sir," another officer interrupted, his voice shaking. "He's already there." Kane turned to the main display just in time to see Marcus. Cole stepped through the final door and into the reactor chamber. Marcus stood in the heart of the throne of Keth. Surrounded by the humming machinery that powered the massive vessel, he was barely standing, his left arm hanging useless at his side, and blood soaking through his uniform in a dozen places. His pistol was empty, lost somewhere in the corridors behind him, and his knife was slick with the blood of enemies who had thought him easy prey. The reactor controls stood before him, glowing with power that could destroy an entire world. All he had to do was trigger the overload, and everything would be over. The ship, the Admiral, the Silence Protocol, the Sithari would be saved. But as his fingers reached for the controls, he hesitated. He thought of Lyris standing beneath the stars, her hand pressed against his chest as she asked him a question that had no good answer. He thought of the promise he had made, the vow to try to come back even though he knew the odds were impossible. And he thought of something else, something he had noticed on his way through the ship, something that might give him a chance and escape pod bay 3 levels up, with pods that could launch automatically when the reactor reached critical. It was a slim hope, barely worth considering, but it was there. Kane's voice boomed through the chamber speakers, filled with fury and something that sounded almost like respect. "It is over. Human, you have fought well, but you cannot escape, and you will die here whether you trigger the overload or not." Marcus smiled, blood staining his teeth, and his hand found the reactor controls. "Maybe," he said, speaking to an enemy who could not possibly understand, "but I made a promise, and I intend to keep it." He activated the overload sequence and ran. Ship's alarms began to wail as the reactor built toward critical mass, and Dominion soldiers scrambled in every direction as they realized what was happening. Marcus ran through the chaos, his broken body screaming in protest as he climbed stairs and fought through corridors and refused to let himself fall. The escape pod bay was exactly where he remembered it, and one pod remained. He threw himself inside just as the first explosion rocked the ship, and he slammed his fist against the launch control as fire bloomed behind him. The pod shot into space an instant before the throne of Keth tore itself apart from the surface of Velith 9. Lyris watched the sky light up with a new star, a brilliant flash of fire that outshone everything else in the heavens. Sithari cried out in joy as the Dominion fleet scattered in confusion, their command ship destroyed and their admiral dead. The Silence Protocol had failed, and they were going to live. But Lyris did not celebrate. She stood alone at the cave entrance, her hand pressed against her chest where Marcus's heartbeat still echoed faint and far away. She did not know if he had survived, could not sense him clearly through the distance and the chaos. All she could do was wait and hope and believe in the promise of a human who had taught her that hope was never foolish. 3 days passed like years for Lyris as she waited for word of Marcus Cole. The Dominion fleet had fled after the destruction of the throne of Keth, their forces scattered and leaderless without Admiral Vorth Kane to command them. The Sithari had emerged from their caves for the first time in months, blinking in the sunlight and singing songs of joy and mourning joy for their survival, and mourning for the human who had made it possible. Lyris stood at the same spot where she had watched Marcus leave, her eyes scanning the sky for any sign of his return. The others told her to rest, to eat, to accept that he was gone. She refused. Veltham bond still pulsed faintly in her chest, a distant heartbeat that told her Marcus was alive somewhere out there. As long as that connection remained, she would not give up hope. He had taught her that on the morning of the 4th day, a signal appeared on the emergency frequencies. a weak distress beacon broadcasting from somewhere in the debris field that still surrounded the planet. Human codes, one of the Sithari technicians reported, his voice shaking with barely contained excitement. It is broadcasting human identification codes. Lyris felt her heart stop. And for a single terrible moment she was afraid to believe. Then she ran through the caves and out into the open air, her glow blazing brighter than it ever had as she screamed for someone to send a rescue ship. The Terran Relief Corps arrived. Before anyone else could respond, 3 vessels that had been en route to Velith 9. When they received Marcus's earlier transmission, they found him drifting in a battered escape pod, barely alive but still breathing. His hand clutched around a small crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, a Sithari memory stone, given to him by Lyris on their last night together. He had held on to it through everything. Through fire and battle and the cold vacuum of space, he had held on to it because it reminded him of her. Lyris was waiting when the rescue ship landed, surrounded by hundreds of Sithari who had gathered to witness the return of their savior. The hatch opened, and 2 human medics emerged carrying a stretcher between them. Marcus lay upon it, wrapped in bandages and connected to machines that beeped with the rhythm of his heartbeat. His eyes were closed, and for one horrible moment, Lyris thought she was too late. Then his eyes opened, and he saw her. The smile that spread across his face was weak and exhausted, but it held more warmth than any sun. "I told you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I told you I would try." Lyris fell to her knees beside the stretcher, her hands finding his face as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "You came back," she said, and the words contained everything she could not express, the fear and the hope, and the overwhelming love that had carried her through the darkness. "I made a promise," Marcus replied, and his hand rose slowly to cover hers. "I could never break a promise to you." The Sithari gathered around them, their glows joining together until the entire landing field blazed with light. And in that moment, surrounded by a people he had saved and a woman he had learned to love, Marcus Cole knew that everything he had suffered was worth it. The weeks that followed were a time of healing for Marcus, for Lyris, and for the world of Velith 9 itself. The Terran Relief Corps established a permanent presence on the planet, providing resources and protection while the Sithari rebuilt their civilization. Marcus recovered slowly from his injuries, spending long hours in the Crystal Valley with Lyris by his side as she used her healing abilities to mend his broken body. They did not speak of the future, neither knew what would come next, and both were content to simply exist in the present. But the galaxy was not content to leave them in peace. Word of what had happened on Velith 9 spread like wildfire through the stars, carried by traitors and refugees and Dominion defectors who had witnessed the impossible with their own eyes. One human had stood against an empire, and one human had taught a peaceful people to resist without violence, to hope without surrender, and to fight without losing themselves. The story grew with each telling, becoming larger than the truth, and yet somehow truer because of it. Other species began to listen, began to wonder if perhaps they too could stand against the Dominion rebellion sparked on a dozen worlds. Inspired by the example of a single human who had refused to accept that the weak must always be devoured by the strong, within a decade, the Dominion of Keth had crumbled, destroyed not by superior firepower but by an idea that could not be killed, the idea that hope was always worth fighting for. 50 years later, on the anniversary of the destruction of the throne of Keth, an elderly Lyris stood before a great monument in the center of New Velith City. The memorial of Marcus Cole rose toward the sky, a statue of a human soldier reaching toward the stars with one hand extended. Beside her stood Marcus himself, gray-haired now and slower than he once was, but still possessing the same stubborn determination that had saved her world so long ago. They had spent 5 decades together, bound by Velthon through joy and sorrow, through triumphs and defeats. Through all the long years of building a galaxy where hope meant something, their bond had never faded. A young Sithari child approached them, her glow flickering with curiosity and awe. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Did one human really change everything? Marcus looked at Lyris, and she looked at him, and 50 years of shared memory passed between them in a single glance. "No," Lyris said softly, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "He reminded us that we could change everything. He just refused to let us forget." The child looked up at the statue, then back at the elderly human who stood beside it. "Why did you do it?" she asked Marcus directly. "Why did you risk everything for people you had never met?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, remembering the crash and the cave and the impossible choice he had faced. "So many years ago, because someone told me that the strong devour the weak, and I refused to accept it," he finally answered. "Because I believe that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And because a very wise woman asked me to come back for her, and I could never let her down." He took Lyris's hand in his, and even after all these years, the contact sent warmth flowing through both of their hearts. "The galaxy learned something important during those dark days," Lyris added, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You can break a human's body, you can take everything they have, but you cannot ever make them stop hoping. And that more than any weapon is why the stars learned to fear them." She paused, and her glow brightened as she looked at her husband with love that transcended species and time, and why they learned to love them above them. The stars burned on brighter now, or so it seemed, for all who dared to hope, and somewhere in the great expanse of space, the ballad of Marcus Cole continued to be sung, passed from world to world and generation to generation, a song about a human who fell from the sky, who taught peace through resistance, and who proved that even the smallest light can drive back the deepest darkness. A song about a promise kept, a bond unbroken, and a love that shook the very stars themselves.